Hello and welcome to Comprehension Points video Snark. I'm currently reading through The Betrothed by Kiera Cass. This is not the first video of this book, so I'd recommend that you watch the other videos before you start this. Links are posted below. Chapter 21. Delia wakes Hollis the next morning and is surprised at how red that Hollis's eyes are. Hollis inwardly explains to the readers that after having left Silas, she went back to her rooms where she basically cried herself to sleep. Delia says that they have to put a cold compress over Hollis's eyes because she has a meeting with Jameson, Quentin, and Valentina. Hollis is randomly surprised by this, as if the thought of actually having duties as Jameson's almost fiancé is legitimately shocking. Delia gets Hollis ready, and then Hollis, Delia, and Nora go down to where this meeting is taking place. The guards open the door for Hollis, but stop Delia and Nora from going in. And apparently this chapter is nothing but the surprise Pikachu face chapter because all three girls are surprised that only Hollis is allowed to sit in on a meeting with a visiting king. Even more surprised Pikachu face when Hollis realizes that her parents are also there. Jameson greets Hollis. He says that he knows that he's been neglecting her and promises to make it up to her once Quentin and his people have left. As I said earlier, Jameson is trying to prevent an all-out war because of King Manchild. Jameson asks Hollis to come sit by his chair. Valentina comes rushing in after a moment. Quentin then asks when the wedding will be. Jameson says that he's finalizing some things, but that it should be soon. Quentin asks if Hollis is from good stock, although Hollis inwardly is angry at Quentin acting like she's a horse or something. The two men go back and forth about Hollis's potential ability to produce an heir. Quentin yells at Hollis when she rightfully points out that Quentin only has one heir right now and he's sickly. However, Jameson is quick to defend Hollis and says that he appreciates the things that she says. However, none of this seems to appease Quentin, and the three of them continue their dumb little argument over how many children that Hollis and Jameson will have, and how suitable that Hollis is. Finally, Jameson seems to put his foot down and insists that if Quentin wants Jameson to sign whatever paper, that Hollis's signature will be next to his own. There's a random priest in the room who hasn't been mentioned up until now. He points out that Hollis and Jameson are not married and thus Hollis cannot sign state documents. Jameson is quick to brush the man's concerns off and says that the two of them being legally married is just a trivial matter at this point, but the priest insists, saying that if they break this one rule, then it'll set a ball rolling and undo every other law in place. Quentin finally relents and says that he and Jameson alone will sign the document. Then, after his son has married, then the two parties will meet up again in a year and everybody can sign it then. Hollis wonders exactly what it is that they're agreeing to sign, and then Quentin literally spells it out for nobody other than the uninformed Hollis and readers. Our eldest daughter will go to the eldest son of Prince Harridan, but only if we also produce a son to have a direct male heir. But because girls are not passed over in succession in Corona, if we only have girls, our second oldest daughter shall be his bride instead. Is that acceptable? So they're basically setting up a political marriage for children that literally haven't even been conceived. Hollis continues along the theme of surprised Pikachu face and acts like she's literally never heard of anything like this, which I find insanely hard to believe considering that she's lived in this political setup her entire life. Even if Jameson isn't entering into a political marriage, obviously there would be others who would have been in situations like this. Lords, dukes, various minor nobility. It's not just kings and princesses that this sort of thing applies to. Valentina and Hollis stand by and watch as the men sign the document. When they're done, Hollis and Valentina embrace. Hollis asks if Valentina knew, but she denies this, insisting that if she had, then she would have told Hollis. She then apologizes to Hollis for the things she said last night, saying that pregnancy brain made her do it. Hollis insists that Valentina has nothing to be sorry for. Valentina goes on and says that she was having morning sickness, which is why she was so late to the meeting. She sees this as a positive sign that the pregnancy is probably going to last. Since the two sides have signed a weird peace treaty with each other, they're going to be leaving soon. Valentina asks that Hollis write to her, and Hollis agrees. She says that she'll need all sorts of advice for when your children are being used as political pawns. Valentina only asks that Hollis write to her first, so that Valentina will have an excuse to write back. Quentin leaves with his wife, although he can't stop glaring at Hollis while he walks from the room. Hollis asks Jameson why it is that Quentin arranged for his grandchildren to be married into the Hollis-Jameson line rather than the child that Valentina is carrying. Jameson doesn't know, but it seems relevant that Quentin's son is set to marry a princess from another country. Most Isoleans prefer to marry their own kind, and the royal line has been completely pure from the onset, meaning that the isolate people are probably inbred as anything, which might explain why Quentin's air is so sickly. Hollis then asks that Jameson warn her next time if he plans to use their future children as leverage. Oh, Hollis, they aren't our children. They're mine. What? I force myself to keep a smile on my face. Any children we make are arrows in my quiver, and I will aim them wherever I must for the sake of Corona. I had to read this, and so do you. Also, there's a lot to unpack here, but we should just burn the entire suitcase. And there's the other shoe suddenly dropping. Jameson suddenly turning into a misogynistic donkey. Curse you, YouTube. For the record, I would be swearing all of the time in these videos. I just don't like editing the audio to bleep it out. Hollis manages to hold it together as she leaves the room. Delia and Nora can see the upset on Hollis, but they don't say anything. Hollis continues to hold it together as she meets up with the Eastoff family, who are saying goodbye to their friends from Isolate. Hollis looks at Silas and imagines babies with her skin in his eyes, and she thinks that they would be their babies, not just children that are born by the mother and completely belong to the father. And then Hollis finally loses it and runs off in tears. Chapter 22. The group from Isolate leaves, and in the days following the incident with Jameson, Hollis finds herself thinking about the children around her a lot more. She notes that the young boys are often alone, whereas girls often have at least one other girl with them. She thinks about how even just a few months earlier she felt pity for the girls who grew up in the countryside, for they didn't know things like silk or the feeling of being swept up in a court dance. Now she almost seems to envy them. The Eastoff family, who is apparently moving as a full set these days, stops to ask Hollis if she's okay. Hollis lies and says that she's feeling a bit blue after all the excitement of the visiting royals. As they comfort her over this, Hollis can't help but think of Lady Eastoff in a motherly way. Lady Eastoff mentions the Crowning Day celebrations that are coming up, and says that Scarlet is so eager to dance with Hollis and the other girls. The entire time that Hollis is talking with the singular family unit, whom I can't stop thinking of them being like a bunch of figurines all stuck onto one base, Silas and Hollis keep exchanging glances. Later, Hollis tries to write a letter to Valentina. She talks about how everything kind of hit her at that moment in the previous chapter, and she wants Valentina to impart some things that she's learned. But the part that's bugging me is how finalized that Hollis is talking, like she's already married to Jameson with a, what did Jameson call his kids? With an arrow in the quiver already. Ew, I can't believe I just said that. But Hollis isn't married, and she can just leave. And I know that this world is awful towards women, but at the same time, I'd rather be some poor peasant than end up like, gestures broadly towards Valentina's story. However, before Hollis can get further in her letter, Delia comes up to her. Hollis crumples up the letter, deciding that it would be best if nobody actually saw that. Delia asks Hollis what's wrong, and Hollis lies about how tired she is following the royal visit. However, Delia calls her out on this, saying that Hollis can't lie to her friend. But then Delia goes too far, and you are going to have to find a way to deal with it. Your marriage isn't arranged to some stranger, your parents aren't sending you to a different country, you're not 12 for crying out loud. Just because none of those things are happening to Hollis doesn't mean that she can't be unhappy. It's not some sort of competition where your husband, who is 4 times your age, has to be beating you, and only then can you be unhappy. And I know that Hollis will likely end up with literally anybody else at this point, if only because the narration has now gone to show that Jameson is awful. But at the same time, I can't help but feel like this book is hammering into a young girl's mind that it doesn't matter if you end up in an awful relationship, so long as you wanted it at some point. That if your parents didn't sell you to the highest bidder, that you have no reason to complain. What if, once he's older and his love is cool, all I'm left with is feeling like I'm another possession of the state, a crown jewel locked up in a room with no windows, only taken out when the people need their spirits lifted and good for little else? No, she's got a good point. And, oh boy, it gets better. Delia encourages Hollis to stay with Jameson, not because of Hollis's own reputation or what her parents might say. No, Delia wants Hollis to stay with Jameson because it'll make Delia's life easier. Hollis tearfully explains that she's losing little bits of herself for every queenly lesson that she has to do, and then she gets to the straw that broke her back about Jameson signing away their children to Quentin. Delia's reaction is kind of expected, not going to lie. She gets angry at Hollis and says that it should have been her, that she knows all of the stuff that Hollis keeps trying to cram into her head, all of the matters of state and politics and what have you, and she also speaks 4 languages, and she brags that she learned all of this while Hollis was literally not studying. Delia also implies that Hollis's blood is dirty simply because Hollis is blonde, that the blondness is more of a trait from isolate rather than corona. Finally, Delia says that she intentionally let go of Hollis the night that Hollis flew into Jameson's arms, that she had only just been intending for Hollis to fall into the ground and Jameson would be taken by Delia's kind-hearted nature. She never meant for Hollis to literally end up in his arms like that. Delia was so certain that Hollis would end up being passed over after a couple of weeks, and why shouldn't she? After all, there were countless other girls before Hollis, of which the narration kept reminding us of in the beginning of the book. But then Jameson actually started to fall for Hollis, and Delia thought that she could get in simply by being by Hollis's side. I know you've been hiding something, and I can't figure out what's made you suddenly want to abandon the goal every eligible woman in Corona was aiming for. She literally just told you, Delia. She said that she's literally just breeding stock to the likes of Jameson and Quentin. If Delia wants Jameson, I say let her have him. Hollis can go skipping off to the country with Silas and actually be happy. Delia again circles back and makes this all about her, that this would ruin her reputation. After a moment of thought, Hollis then asks Delia who she's planning to marry now that Jameson is seemingly off the market. Delia gives a name of Lord So-and-so, somebody who has lands and titles but isn't so high up that he'd refuse a marriage to somebody like Delia. Hollis says that the offer will be arranged between Delia and Lord Alistair. Delia then asks Hollis if she loves Jameson. Hollis says that yes, but she also has to admit that she loves Jameson in the way that she currently feels about Delia, that they might have had some fun times together, but there's currently too much hurt to go back to how things used to be. The chapter ends on this note, and when Jameson proposes, I will marry, for love. Why do I get the feeling that what Hollis said and what Delia heard are 2 very different things? Thanks for listening to my book Snark on YouTube. New videos are up every Monday. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so that you don't miss anything. Also, while you're waiting for the new video next week, be sure to catch up on my other video series. If you're already caught up with that, then you can head over to Tumblr for my main book Snarks, always free and updated daily. People who support me on Patreon also have early access to my daily Snark, but also bonus Snark that isn't up anywhere else. People who donate to me either by supporting me on Patreon or by making a one-time donation via PayPal or Ko-fi also get shoutouts in my videos. Thank you so much to Dawn, Phoebe, and Nikki for supporting me already. Be sure to join my Patreon or donate to hear your name next week. Also, if you want to read some of the stuff that I've published, then you can purchase my works on Amazon. I have 19 erotic short stories, 1 short story collection, and 1 full-length novel. Links for everything will be posted below. See you next week, guys. Finally, Jameson seems to put his foot down and insists that if Quentin wants to... Finally, Jameson seems to want to...